thank you all for being here. It's great to see so many people that are just passionate and doing such great work in this issue. Just a quick word, I run the Center for Immigrant Future. If you don't know about us, check us out at www.nycfuture.org or follow us on Twitter at NYCFuture. You can tweet about today's event. The hashtag and our handle are right here. You know, the Center for Immigrant Future, we're a think tank. We focus on, as Gifford said, a lot of the issues that I think are important, but have for a long time really floated under the radar. And I think we really try to elevate important issues, put them on the radar of policymakers, put out achievable solutions for policymakers to run with to address some of New York City's biggest problems. And, you know, although we generally focus on how does New York grow and diversify its economy, how does New York expand economic opportunity, you know, in so many areas over the past few years, we've been looking at demographic trends. What are the key trends that New York needs to be aware of and plan for going forward? And it was really hard to escape that one of the biggest trends that I think very few people are talking about is that New York City is getting a lot older. But when we took a look at the kind of broad trend of the aging of New York City's population, what really struck us and what really, frankly, surprised us is that so much of the aging of New York City's population is being driven by foreign-born, by immigrants. And the numbers really were stunning. I think you've probably seen them in the report or in the news coverage about a report. Now 46% of all of the over 65 population in New York are foreign-born. And like I said, pretty much all of the growth is being driven that way. And so we're very fortunate to have some great panelists today. They're going to help us discuss what are the implications for these trends on New York City going forward, and what are some solutions. We're going to try to have a very solution-oriented discussion, looking at what are some things that the next administration really should do to plan for this. But before we get into our great panel, I want to bring up our really wonderful researcher, Christian Gonzalez Rivera, who's going to just spend a few minutes talking about some of the key findings of our report. Christian.
All right, so I want to join Jonathan and Gifford in welcoming you all. Thank you so much for coming. So, let's see, I got my clicker here. Okay, so I'm just going to spend a few minutes going over some of the sort of top level figures in the report, since you've probably all taken a look at some of the general ones by now. So the main thing we want to take away, I mean, as Jonathan said, is that New York City is getting a lot older, and that's the first demographic trend that we really need to pay attention to. New York City in general is growing older. I mean, right now, about 12% of the population is above the age of 65 to 65 or older. And by the year 2030, it's estimated that 15% of the population is going to be above the age of 65. So there's from about 1 million today to about 1.3 million by the year 2030. But most of that growth, as Jonathan said as well, is being driven by the immigrant population. Right now, there's 463,000 older immigrants in New York City, and which means that 1 out of every 10 older immigrant in the nation lives in New York City. So New York City is really a hub for older immigrants nationwide. And so that amounts to 46% of the population of New York City, of the older population in New York City actually being foreign born. And most of them live out in Queens and Brooklyn. So the other thing to take a look at is that the growth in the older population is being driven by immigrants. Since 1990, the population of foreign-born seniors has increased 16% between 1990 and 2000, and between 2000 and the latest census, it's increased by 30%. So it's increasing, and it's also an accelerating trend. While the native-born population has actually been declining. So really, when you can't talk about older people in New York City without talking about immigrants. Yet, one of the biggest issues that we have to face is that older immigrants also face a lot of serious issues. First of all, another main sort of interesting point is that in 21 out of the 55 census-designated neighborhoods, which means PUMAs for the database, older immigrants are actually the majority of the senior population. And specifically in Queens, 10 out of the 14 PUMAs, the majority of the 65 over population is actually immigrants. Unfortunately, older immigrants also have higher levels of poverty and a lot of challenges that they're facing as well, which is going to, of course, because they comprise such a large percent of the population of older people, is going to affect the way we deliver services in general to older people in the city. 24% of older immigrants in the city live below the poverty, live in households that are below the poverty line, compared to 15% of native-born seniors. The median income of older immigrants is half of their native-born counterparts. And fully 31% of older immigrants don't receive Social Security benefits at all, receive zero Social Security benefits, compared to 16% of native-born seniors. So all of this really is addressing the serious challenges that older immigrants are facing. Furthermore, one of the biggest challenges we can imagine, for older immigrants is the language and culture barriers. Fully 60% of older immigrants in New York City have reported to the census that they speak English less than very well. And specifically 37% live in linguistically isolated households, which of course means that no one over the age of 14 in the household speaks English. And like many of these issues that we're talking about, they differ greatly by region or country of origin. Specifically, when we're talking about levels of English proficiency, among Korean seniors, 94% speak English less than very well. Among the Chinese population, 92%. So this is an issue that not only is it an issue for all older immigrants, but it differs greatly from region or country of origin. But this is something that the panelists are going to speak to a lot more and also talk about solutions. So thank you a lot for coming, and Jonathan's coming back to welcome the panelists.
All right, thank you, Christian. Well done.